Okay, we're back.
Does the admin have the capability to take what's in the opaque config to define their own? Like, should vendors provide you with opaque config file that has some empty parameters, and then you define your own gateway classes from that?
Yeah, I think that's the idea, is that all that stuff is actually like very vendor and implementation specific. For example, what is your log file name? Like things like that are configured for a given controller that like it's kind of very hard to generalize.
The gateway class name would actually be defined by the administrator?
Yes,
typically?
yes.
But then it makes it different, right? Like NGX runs in this cluster named like load balancer. The other is like NGX load balancer.
But there is no global registry for Nginx. And in fact, there's no one implementation for Nginx. So how can you, unless we want to kind of register like well-known names somehow.
Then you just can't, like, let's say when you bootstrap the controller or whatnot, the load balancer, you can't just apply a bunch of YAMLs, right? Because of the, like, this gateway class can be a part of the bootstrap process in the YAML, and then you just apply it and then say, oh, run this, run this, run this, and then the gateway class is part of the.
But that's already the case. You have to already decide which ingress class is default or not. And we've had issues where multiple decided they're default and then bad things happened. Sorry, so for context, we're talking about if the administrator is responsible for guaranteeing non-collision of gateway classes, it makes it a little bit harder for example, you just pull something off the shelf and then you just instantiate it. Although we would expect the off-the-shelf stuff to kind of have a fairly specific name.
Okay.
It seems like a big difference between what we have now with the ingress class, where the ingress class is basically defined by the vendor, whereas in this new model, it seems like the gateway class needs to be set up and configured by the cluster operator.
Yeah, I would imagine those, like you could come up with an off-the-shelf ingress class that you just put your name in there just as an example, and then if vendors don't care, they could just pull it in directly. But there's no strict, like you don't have to necessarily consume it like that.
So by convention, like Nginx ingress might be the one that everybody uses, but it is up to the operator to define their own name.
Yeah, I mean, it could come up with, you could, for example, at least the controllers I know of, you can configure the class name as an argument as well. I'm assuming that's because also this name collision issue. So, but look, we can note it, and Han, we should file an issue to discuss it. So to follow up, Harry, you were asking to sort of give an overview of Gateway.
Yeah, just an overview of how it relates to gateway class, so folks can go back and like figure out like, okay, why is gateway class the way it is?
I see. Okay, so the relationship between gateway and gateway class. So gateway class is intended to define sort of by the administrator. Oh, I'm not sharing. Hold on. Let me share. Okay, so the intent of gateway class is to define a sort of, for the user, the consumer, the assumption is that the consumer cares less about how things are implemented, but they do care about what it gets them. And gateway class kind of adds that level of indirection in that the administrator of the cluster can say, hey, if you're going to, in this cluster, create an internet-facing load balancer, use the class from internet. I have in the background used some, in-cluster proxy or maybe some cloud load balancer. You don't necessarily need to understand that. You just need to consume the from internet. Now, when the user wants to create proxies or gateways based on that, they basically create a gateway that then is of the class from internet. So you know that everything configured with this gateway will then be routable from the internet. So one thing that, again, we were talking about the meaning of names, it might be that, as this moves along and people implement this, that there may be some common names that we can kind of converge on for ease of interoperability between cloud providers. And this also lets you sort of not have, make it more portable in that you could say from internet, these are horrible names, I just realized. But from internet in most cloud providers is going to be an internet-facing load balancer, and then that's kind of how the admin will provide it to you. This should probably be like x.net.case, anyways, something like this. But that's the basic gist. So similar to how, and then the other way to think about it is the relationship between ingress class and ingress is the relationship of gateway and gateway class. Gateway describes the actual thing. And then in this API, gateway is sort of one-to-one with the lifecycle of actually the infrastructure and getting things configured. But what gets configured is gateway class. Is that a good summary?
That's a very good summary, I think. It's just it's a lot of scope creep inside gateway class. So we can discuss that later on because we are out of time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll work out the Zoom difficulties, hopefully, next week. All right. Thanks, everyone, for showing up.
Thank you.
Oh, the time limit? Yeah, we should always have time limit.
Yeah, so that
We should have a ticking of the clock.